Okay, here we go. Good morning. Now, where do you go on television or the internet to watch an interview show and the interviewer comes on, takes a 100-year-old horn and plays the Third Man theme? And that was from the movie The Third Man, shot in 1950, starring Orson Welles and Joseph Cotten. Terrific movie. I wanted to play that for you because it's a bit unusual. And if you ever get that movie to watch, you can see that the guy who wrote that theme and played it is Anton Karas, and he played it on a zither, which is a string instrument, and it was the theme through the whole movie. So there you are. It's a bit unique, but so is this show, because we expose people who are guilty of abusing other people. Without any further words, I want to welcome you to Life After Scientology, and I'm Ron Miscavige. Anyway, welcome to this episode. Now, before we get into the interview, which I'm sure you're going to enjoy, I have George White on again this week because he didn't get into, well, he didn't finish up his entire story. So he's going to continue that, and you're going to enjoy this because this is a well-educated, very articulate person who actually knows what the hell he's talking about. We have one patron, and that is Stephen Winter for $1. Thank you very much, Stephen. Very much appreciate it. And those of you out there who don't know what that is, if you go to my website, therealronmiscavige.com, you can join and become a patron for whatever you'd like. It's a contribution to keep this show going, and I appreciate it very much. And along those lines, I just want to read this. I just saw it on the internet today on Mike Rinder's blog. Listen to this. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. I'm going to read it again. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And I'll tell you, as far as I'm concerned, that applies right here. Because we want to do something, get more people to subscribe to this program. That's doing something about it. Tell your friends about what the Church of Scientology is doing. You're doing something about it. Become a patron. Even if it's for $1 or $2, it doesn't matter. You're doing something about it, and I guarantee you do any of these things, you're going to feel better. So that's my message for you today, as it is every week. So, look, let's get into the show because this is fascinating stuff. George walked the walk. He lived it. So he didn't read about this in a book someplace. As a matter of fact, he wrote a book called Lucifer's Bridge. And I would advise you to read this book because it's going to go into details just as we do on this program. But you have it in writing then. So anyway, without any further words, let's welcome George White. And George, over to you. Let's transition a little bit from last week. Give the people a little point of reference to where you were, and then we'll continue on, okay?
Thank you very much, Ron. I appreciate it, the compliments, and I enjoyed reading the feedback from the fans or the people who are participating, and I feel encouraged in moving on and getting into even more depth. One of the things I omitted to say last week when you asked the question, what made me stay in Scientology, was an incident that happened in one of my first sessions. And I want to briefly go over that because it involves a past life incident. When I was doing my life repair, the auditor kept asking the question about a certain pain. And she kept saying, go earlier, earlier, earlier. And finally, what happened is I broke into a scene where I'm on a Roman ship in, maybe the first century AD, somewhere around there. And I'm rowing, and it's like she pushes me through this thing. I feel like I'm in some sort of a past life. My mind sort of goes and transitions into it. Now, I took that as a motivating factor for being in Scientology, and I always felt that it was a past life incident until I got out and started going through and analyzing it over and over and over again. And what I finally determined was that it was a picture from a movie. It was from Ben-Hur. And the reason I know is because I even went and watched the movie over again to see if that was it. So I did not at that point in time believe I was in a past life incident. I could see there that what was happening was I brought in that scene from Ben-Hur. And then when I moved out of the scene, I saw it from a distance. So I was mistaking that for Thetan exterior and all these other things. But it was not a past life incident. I know that now. And this brings me into the frenzy that was going on when the Free Winds was purchased. And I attended so many briefings that I can't even count the number of briefings. And one in particular I remember is they were asking for money. You went in there and the Sea Org member pulled out a 2 or 3 sentence policy from L. Ron Hubbard that said, you are as powerful as the sun. And there was something about you couldn't really tell how big the sun was, but that's enough. That's the amount of energy that you can generate. So this frenzy about going to the Sea Org was just out of sight. They were constantly asking for money. There were people coming over. My phone was ringing off the hook. And then the biggest thing that happened was way before we ever got on the Free Winds. It was announced that the textbook for OT8 was History of Man. And everybody was applauding. There was meetings. We were encouraged to read it. There were Sea Org members coming to the Miami org at that time, giving presentations all about this. I started reading and rereading the book. Now, at that point in time, it was a no-brainer that we were going to be auditing implants, because History of Man is really nothing but implants. I'll make a comment about History of Man because it has been bandied about in the press, and there was a book written by theosophists in the early 20th century by Charles Leadbeater. It was called Man Whence Whither. And when I read that book, I was directed to the book by Catherine Wessinger from Loyola of New Orleans University. I was just amazed because the technique that they used was very similar to what Hubbard did. George,
hang on a second.
Sure.
Give the name of that book again slowly, just in case somebody wants to write that down and look it up.
Okay, that was Man Whence Whither. And there's question marks after the whence and the whither. And it was by
Man Whence Whither.
Whence Whither. And it was Charles Leadbeater. He was a theosophist. And it was one of the most famous books of the time. It was extremely well read. I believe it was published in 1910 or 1908, somewhere around there. So It's probably a year before Hubbard was born. But he got together the most prominent theosophists, and they had a conference where they were going to go explore past lives, and all of them got together and came up with this really weird interpretation. Of course, Blavatsky was into past lives, but it was a different situation with her, and I'll explain that later. But Hubbard really got together a bunch of people on the E-meter. And what he says when he wrote History of Man was that it was verified on many, many hundreds of pieces. But he was essentially doing the same thing. He was collecting these imaginary events or coming up with his own events and basically putting together this book. Now, the reason I'm going into this other photo here is I want to bring a point out, and it sort of reinforces what happened last week, which was the Heliotrobus implants and also the Marcabs, which we a little bit got into, but this is sort of a cleanup from last week. This is the death of Hypatia, and it's in the early, between the 2nd and the 4th centuries AD. Her father was a scholar, and she was a Neoplatonist. She was one of the last Neoplatonists. She was brutally murdered because what was happening is that Christianity was taking over Alexandria. The merchants were starting to come in. And she was actually murdered by Christians. This is all over Blavatsky because Blavatsky was a woman. And so she was bringing this. But although Hubbard never gets into it, it illustrates the implant that he's talking about, because he talks about it in the sense that the Marcabs, every couple of centuries, come back and reinforce the implant of Christianity, Jesus, and so forth. And what would lead a crowd to brutally murder? They stripped her naked, murdered her, and then dismembered her. And all because what she was doing is there was a man named Orestes who was interested in Christianity, and she was teaching him Neoplatonism, which of course is not really Christian, even though a lot of Plato was taken into Christianity. And so what happened was the mob or the crowd in Alexandria, which was a cultural center at the time, 500,000 book library, went crazy and just ripped her to pieces. But that would have been Hubbard saying that this implant is reinforced. So what Hubbard is saying is that every 3 or 4 centuries we're getting this. And even if you read his briefings and his student briefing, Hubbard believed that Marcabs were actually walking on planet Earth at the time that he was writing, and that they are even today. But these are Marcabian agents. And where this goes back to is that in the Galactic Confederacy, Hubbard was he was an officer named Raoul, which is really nothing more than the letters of his name reversed. He fought the Marcabs to a standstill as one of the things of the Galactic Confederacy. And so History of Man is really a lot of things that come out of people's minds about these implants that he collected, because he had this idea that from the Heliotrobus implants, you went into incident 2, which is really the Xenu story. And the Xenu story is intimately connected with him as a person because he was there. And the Sea Org members were really the loyal officers in the Galactic Confederacy. Now, as far as
Wait,
It,
before we get too further up the line here, I think we bypassed a certain area that you wanted to talk about.
the
Now,
damage.
the damage, correct?
Yes,
And yeah,
let's go into that.
yeah,
That's
because
really, really
I'd like to
important.
get that in because this way we can go in a little bit more of a chronological sequence. I enjoyed what you told me. Don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but let's get back to that because you did have a point to make on that about listening to David Mayo's tapes and
Yes.
OT5 BTs and sequences.
Let's go back to the damage. All
Okay.
right. First of all, when I came back from the free winds, I had two FSMs, a woman and a man. I'm not going to mention their names. 2 or 3 weeks after I came back from the free winds, I remember this almost vividly. My female FSM came in and said, "I've got it." And I was sitting there with her husband, and we both said, "You've got what?" She says, "I have got cancer. The doctor has confirmed that I have cancer." Now, what she was on the free winds a few months before that. She died about a year and a half after that. I talked to her on the phone before she died, a half hour before she died, because I talked to her and then I was so close to her. I talked to her and she died, and he called me back and told me she passed. That was her husband. But her sister just went bananas, sued Scientology. She was from Italy. Her two stepsons were just uh, taken aback by this. They just turned into bitter critics of Scientology. But she went to Flag before she died during that year and a half period, and she wrote me some letters. Uh, they basically told her, "We can't do anything." She went to the free winds. "You're out. You know, you've got to go handle your cancer." She died. Now, while this is going on, my other FSM, I used to go over to his house to watch football games, or we talk about certain things. He confided in me on many occasions. He was terrified by the spontaneous combustion that we got from Hubbard's briefing. And he would sit in front of me and go, "Oh, ooh, that spontaneous combustion." And he would just practically tear up. And it's like he was living a nightmare, because what he told me was whenever he was sleeping or whatever, he literally thought that he was going to spontaneously combust and the flames were going to burn him up. He literally thought that.
Where the hell
Now
did he
he
get that idea?
that is in OT8 material. The student briefing, it's right in there. It says, you have to read it really carefully. By the way, I've read that thing so many times. I've got it. I know because I wrote the book about it. But it's right in there. It says that if you make a mistake in processing your implants, or if you fail to follow instructions, there is a very good chance that you will spontaneously combust, and that it was the Markab agents that were really doing it. All right. It's in there. It's
Wow.
in there. It's in there. Now, the other person I want to talk about was not really an OT8, but it was Roxanne Friend. I met her on OT6 and 7, and she eventually died too from cancer. And she sued the Church of Scientology. You can check this out on the internet by just Googling Roxanne Friend. And she settled. And I talked to her while she was doing the lawsuit. And she found a lawyer who said, "Well, what we're going to do is basically say that Dianetics and Scientology claims that it's based on science. It absolutely positively is not based on science." And then he proved in his lawsuit that that was the case. They eventually settled. She died from cancer also, but she never made it to OT8. And I remember I went to LA to see her before she died. There's quite a bit before she died. And she thought there were agents following her. I met her at the Celebrity Center, and she was just you couldn't settle her down. Uh, but that's just an example of what was going on, because I think they had followed her across the country and kidnapped her and brought her to Flag. But anyway, the details are there. Now, the other damage I mentioned the lady that was flying around thinking she was a kamikaze, and the Mexican man and the Israeli lady that wanted to commit suicide, was my best friend on the free winds. I called him. I couldn't. I dropped out for a little while, and I wasn't calling people, but I finally got him, and he was in Sacramento, California. He was sleeping in a closet. His daughter-in-law, or his daughter and his son-in-law, who was an airline pilot, could not believe that this man gave all of his money to Scientology. Now, this man was an engineer, flew his own plane at one time, and was sleeping in a closet because he couldn't afford an apartment. His strategy was to get a retail space and sell something during the day, and then sleep in the closet at night. And that's really, I lost track. I've lost track of him, and I don't know where he is. But this is just a brief example of what was going on after. Now, I'm going to bring this up now because it's so important.
Yeah, but wait, George, before you continue, this guy sleeping in the closet, you mean to tell me he went up and became OTA also?
Yes, I met him on the free winds. He was OTA.
Good
Yes,
Lord.
he fell apart, and I can go on about his story, but he was a hell of a good guy, and he was wealthy. He had the money. He was a Caltech graduate. I mean, I didn't know. I knew people that were the cream of the crop. I knew people that were in there who had. And his thing was, he was on objectives, and he thought he went through the wall as a Thetan. That was it. That was it.
Okay, now, just to clear up, just explain what objectives are in a few sentences, George. Just for
Okay.
your audience, please.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to turn that over to you.
Okay, well, basically, all it is this. It's finding yourself in an environment, you're in an environment and you do everything necessary to bring all of your attention right into present time where you are. And many of the processes consist of going over and touching something. And there's an auditor with you who says, touch that wall. You touch it. He says, thank you, let go. And you walk around touching things in the environment till it becomes totally real to you that that's where you are. And this is supposed to take your attention off past things that have happened to you that maybe your attention has been dwelling on them. And this has been making you unwell or not in good health or just a little bit nuts or whatever. All it is to get you where you realize, hey, here I am. I'm nowhere else. I'm right in this room right now. I'm looking at a camera. I'm looking at a monitor, and my producer is sitting there, and the room is blue, and there's nice pictures in back of me. That would be me having a realization that's where I am, and I'm doing an interview show right now. That's the whole purpose of the objectives. Anyway, there's a brief explanation of that. I don't want to get into it any further, but just for the sake of our audience, they might not know what this stuff is. So I like to clear it up. You know what I mean, George?
You're right on that score.
Okay.
And this is the other thing that is very important to me to get this sort of out into the public is we had a meeting, my two FSMs and I, right after OT8. This is before she died and before he died. Now, the rumor we heard from European OT8s that David Miscavige was violently punching Sea Org members. And we were alarmed. So we had a meeting. We decided, what are we going to do about this? All right. I said, well, hey, if he tries to punch me, I'm going to punch him back. And he's just going to feel the end right there. It's just not going to go any further than that. And my two FSMs were very sheepish about really even opposing David Miscavige, or they were afraid of getting declared. I wasn't. But they said, all right, we're going to turn it over to you. We're going to take your lead. We want you to deal with this. And so I said, yeah. I said, well, okay. I said, and I clenched my fists. And I said, he throws a punch at me. it's the end for him. All I'm waiting for is one punch. Okay. And I was ready. And this guy was just going to feel it. There just was no way he was going to get through this. Well, I went to the Free Winds because they were desperate. They called me and said, "You're the only one who can come to the Free Winds because you live in Miami." I said, "Okay, I'll go to the Free Winds." All right, now I get to the Free Winds. There's maybe 4 people on the whole ship. We get a briefing about how to be a genius, which I thought was really cool. It was an old Sea Org guy, and I didn't really mind it because he wasn't really serious about what he was talking about. He just wanted to get through the assignment. But he gave us this nice little talk. Now I go out to have lunch to the main deck where they had a huge, beautiful buffet set up. And who do I see? I see David Miscavige. Okay. So I'm alone. Now, immediately the alarms go off in my head. Is this guy going to throw punches? He's violent. I already know that. It's been verified. So I get myself ready. I'm cocking my fists and I walk over to him, ready to just deck him. Actually, I wasn't going to deck him. I was going to throw him overboard. Now, we were up on the second deck, if you can see the Free Winds. And he probably would have went into the bay because we were in Curacao. And I've apologized to you, Ron, about this because I have a son and he's your son. But I can honestly say that without moral conscience, and I think that that's L. Ron Hubbard because he was talking about what you do to protect somebody in power. And I was still a Kool-Aid drinker at that time. I was going to throw him over the deck. And that was going to happen. If I had to hit him, I was going to hit him. And there was nothing in this universe that was going to stop me. So I feel bad about that. And I've looked at it through over the years because that is not my nature. That is not my nature. But I had no way of getting around this. But what happened was he sort of put his hand out in a very limp manner to shake my hand. And I realized at that point in time that he wasn't going to throw any punches because he wasn't cocked, he wasn't ready, and maybe he sensed that there was something that was going to come at him. You know what I mean? But he talked very little. He was very, very, very quiet. I couldn't really even get a word out of him. And I'm going to continue the story and tell you why. Because I got off the ship after that incident. I went home. I was living in Miami in a townhouse, and the phone rang. I picked up the phone. It was the registrar from the Free Winds, and she says to me, "You're my last hope." And I said, "Well, I don't know. What do you mean I'm your last hope?" She says, "Well," she says, "my friends got a boat and I escaped off the Free Winds in the middle of the night. And we got to a shore. And from there, they flew me to Fort Lauderdale. I'm in Fort Lauderdale." She says, "I have no money." She says, "You're my last hope because I am getting out of Scientology." And I said, "Well, what happened? Tell me what happened. What happened?" And she said, "It was a bloodbath." She said it was a bloodbath. Now, I never really verified with her what that meant. I just sort of took it that it was really bad. She said, "He lined us up." Who lined you up? David Miscavige. He lined us up. And she just said, "It was brutal." And I said, "Well, give me the details. What was going on?" She said, "No, I don't want to talk about it." She said, "I don't want to talk about it." She said, "All I want to do is meet with you and see if you can arrange uh, something for me." So I said, "Well, you're a blown Sea Org member. I don't know." But I said, "All right, here's what I'm going to do. I said, I will meet you personally, and tell me where you are. And she told me where she was, out there in Fort Lauderdale, near the docks. And I went out there, and she never showed up. And I didn't have any means of reaching her. But that is exactly what happened. And I never could get in touch with her. She was apparently, from what I found out later, the daughter of a very prominent Scientologist. And yeah, he looks a little different there. He nearly went into the bay. And
But now, George, look at this. What kind of religion is it that would put you in a frame of mind where you felt you had to throw somebody off a ship?
yeah, that's amazing.
Think about that. That's the real crux of the matter here. It's not that you
Yes.
wanted to punch him because you already punched other people. It's that you would get in a frame of mind, or he would do those things. That's
Yeah.
the product of Scientology?
That is amazing. And the other thing that has tormented me is I didn't care once I threw him over the deck what happened to him. You see,
Yeah.
that is the real, because what was burning in my head was this Scientology bulletin, like Bolivar, where you get rid of somebody who is blocking L. Ron Hubbard,
Yeah.
and that is a tragedy. That is the motivation as to why I wrote Lucifer's Bridge, because
Right
I
on.
wanted to see, where is this man coming from. I
Yeah.
had to have answers. Where does this come from? What gives him the right to punch out these Sea Org members? What gives him the right to call this bloodbath? How does this evolve? And I'll get into that, because that became my my way of looking at this moral issue. Where does this lack of morality? And I talked to Brian Lambert, and he's got the same issue: is where does this evil come from? Now, I found a few answers here, but it's still it's a horrible thing. There is no religion. I cannot, in my own mind at this point in time, justify how a religion with a sales force is allowed to exist in a tax exempt status. I don't
Yeah.
understand it. I don't. It's mind boggling.
Yeah.
So
Well,
anyway, getting back to history of man, and the thing that I started studying L. Ron Hubbard in real depth, and when I got off the free winds, I noticed that, why didn't they call it history of women? Why didn't L. Ron Hubbard call history of man history of men and women? So I started looking into that, and one of the things I started reading in Blavatsky, and I found it awfully odd, is and as I said to you, I read all of her works, is Hubbard copied certain things out of Blavatsky, some things word for word, but never really gave her credit. One of the things that is in Blavatsky that got me interested was this thing about Torquemada, Torquemada, for anybody who didn't know, he was the inquisitor who killed all the Christians, okay?
right.
Or not the people who wouldn't be Christians. He didn't kill Christians, but he was a Jesuit. And I got into some issues on these blogs where people called me a Jesuit and a Torquemada. And I don't know who this was, but I responded to him, and he's never written back, because I think it's ridiculous. I said, you Scientologists, you take this pride in talking about Torquemada and how Jesuits were bad, when what you don't understand is that L. Ron Hubbard, who had no education, copied most of that word for word out of Blavatsky. And you can cite the passages where that happens. The other thing that he took out of Blavatsky was most of the stories about Atlantis. Where Hubbard talks. There's Blavatsky. Hubbard talks about Atlantis. that's pretty much coming out of Blavatsky.
Could we
Truth
freshen up?
lecture
Could we freshen up people's minds as to who
about
Blavatsky
Blavatsky.
was? Yeah, just a little.
Sure. Okay, she was born in the 1840s in Russia, and I think the significant thing, yeah, the significant thing to know about Blavatsky is that her father and grandfather had a huge library in Russia, and they were fascinated by the occult. So they had all the books about Neoplatonism, all the books about the Neoplatonists, and everything. And she, as a little girl, just sat there and read them. And if you read her works, she was accomplished. And when she talks about these different Neoplatonists, she read them.
Yeah.
And so she wrote a series of books. She was a sensation. She was all over the newspapers. She eventually got busted in India. There was a famous incident where she had claimed that one of her ascending masters was writing her letters. And what happened was the British heard about it, and they sent somebody from the British Royal Society out there to verify it. And he was a take no prisoners kind of a person. So the first thing he did when he got to India was he had his men take sledgehammers and axes and tear down the wall where it was alleged that these letters were coming from the ascending masters. And what they found back there was like a little post office. And so from that time forward, she was totally discredited. She had to leave India, and she eventually died. But she had written these books, which are master of the occult. It's mastery of the occult, I can assure you, because I've read it. And now, eventually, the British Royal Society apologized to her and said just because they knocked down the wall and found this post office behind the wall, they still had no proof that she wasn't real.
Yeah.
So she eventually, but if you read Blavatsky in total, and she wrote just as much as L. Ron Hubbard, the entire skeleton of Scientology really comes out of Blavatsky. I mean, it rings bells, and there's certain parts of it that are almost word for word. The Road to Truth lecture has this part about the specialization of the physics and chemistry lab. And that's almost word for word out of Blavatsky. So Hubbard never acknowledged Blavatsky. He never paid her any attention, but he was really plagiarizing him in the long run. So that is basically a brief picture of who Helena Petrova Blavatsky was.
Okay, good.
All right, now so we get into history of man, and we're on the free winds, and we've got to run. We know we're going to run implants. So the very first one we run is the heliotropus, which you really saw already.
Right.
Now there's another implant which you have to run on OT8, and that is the while Xenu was blowing people up, these unknown people from outside of the MES universe are by telepathy controlling the GEs and the DNAs of people. So what Hubbard is saying in OT8 is right here on this drawing done by Suzanne Legrise, and you'll see to the left, the Marcabs are going to come down again and recharge the Christian implant, which includes the heliotropus implant, plus the ideas of Jesus Christ, plus the ideas of God, Savior, and all this. Now, Hubbard is predicting that he is going to be intergalactically famous. So you see that camera there, the intergalactic news. And what that is portraying is that it's showing Hubbard. Now, Hubbard is sitting in the center, and by this time, of course, he's developed a better e-meter. So you can see that it's a much more electronic e-meter. But he's controlling, he's debugging and debunking the Marcab invasion. Now, the Marcabs will be defeated by the Galactic Confederation, which, even though they produce Xenu, are really the good guys. All right. Now, what you see there is the spaceships of the Marcabs being totally destroyed. The general public is then, as the Antichrist, offered Scientology. They reject Christianity, and this ushers in the golden age of Scientology. On Hubbard's right breast, you see um, a tree with a serpent and Eve. And Hubbard considered this to be one of the greatest jokes of all time, because the Galactic Confederation is identified with the serpent, the mythological serpent, and Eve. And actually, the Galactic Confederation is not the serpent. You see on his neck DNA on the right side of his neck, the left side in the picture. You see DNA because he's really setting right the DNA and the GEs. I'm using DNA and GE pretty simultaneously, interchangeably. And he's got on an ascot, and he's got a triangle there, which signifies ARC. All right. Now, the little horns are just sort of there, just show that he's basically Luciferian. Now, Lucifer, Hubbard called the light bearer or light bring or light bearer. It doesn't really matter. Lucifer is really out of the root lucid, to make clear or to brighten. And he's not here admitting that he has any satanic powers, but the satanic powers come from other sources. But those were Hubbard's predictions among others, and he had some other predictions in there that you had to on OT8. He's saying in OT8, and by the way, I want to get into one thing about there. I went last night. I have a picture of the graduating class, which I'm not putting on the internet because I want to protect people's privacy. But I counted, and this blew me away. I never counted. There were 30 graduates in the picture. There were 37 that started, but a lot of people either dropped out, didn't make it.
George, graduate from what?
On OT8.
Okay, all right.
That received OT8. Okay,
buddy.
23 were women. Count them, 23. Wow. There were only 7 men on the ship. Now, I was one of them, and I looked, and it never occurred to me because they're just people. But yeah, 23 of them were women and 7 men. Now, Hubbard had this thing about women. I don't know what it was. First of all, he's never in his past lives touted anything he ever accomplished as a woman, and he would have been in there 50% of the time as a woman. And the other thing is he writes History of Man. He leaves out women. How are you supposed? Here we have on the free winds 27 or 23 out of 30 women reading History of Man, running implants about men. And I would say that in the original maiden voyage, it was probably predominance of women too. I don't know. I mean, I was not there.
I was there, and it was predominantly women.
There you go.
Yep.
Yeah. See, samples work. We use science. Hubbard didn't. But the other thing that and this is for Brian Lambert, because he was talking about the evil realms, and I want to mention this because it's really important, is in that document, he makes a 1-sentence reference to Kabbalah. Now, last night, I burned the midnight oil and went through Kabbalah. There's Hubbard. He says that in the end, Kabbalah was right. And if you look and you say, well, he can't be in total because Kabbalah is such a complex thing. But if you look at
George, another interruption here.
Yeah.
We briefly got to tell people what Kabbalah is, because not everybody is that familiar with this stuff. So make them
Okay, it's Jewish mysticism, and it was basically way back. It was King Solomon towards the end of his life. It is there's many different versions of it. It has a magical element, a mystical element. I never was a Kabbalist, but Blavatsky was all over it. And here's basically reading Blavatsky and also the wiki article, where this entire idea of evil in Scientology really finds its origin, because Hubbard is letting us know in Kabbalah, the origin of the universe really occurs because of a mixture of good and evil. So if you take the Christian God, even in Paradise Lost, he's all good, all right? There is nothing but goodness in God. Whereas in Kabbalah, you have evil. And please, if you're in Kabbalah, don't jump on me for this, because I'm only reading the interpretations. But in Kabbalah, you have to have evil in order to contrast the good. In other words, you need light and darkness. You need
Right.
white and black. It's that simple. And that's with the French. That's with all kinds of people. That comes up all over the place. So, and Hubbard is really saying, I'm rejecting Christianity because it's all goodness, is all it is. It's all goodness. Now, Kabbalah happens to start with the idea of evil as being necessary, which is really where Lucifer comes in, because the idea of Lucifer with Hubbard is you really need to bring Lucifer forward, because man needs enough reason or knowledge to free himself, which is why you see these debates in Christian theology of Adam and Eve, Adam saying, why did you eat the apple? I had to eat the apple. We need to know something about this. So they give up their perfect state of OT powers, and they go the Luciferian way. Now, Hubbard is really on the opposite trail, because even if you read Blavatsky, Blavatsky is known as right-handed occult. In right-handed occult, you're only dealing with goodness. She has ascending masters, which are her OTs. She doesn't have thetans where every little person walking the street is just a thetan and can become superpowers. Whereas in Hubbard, you're putting in this idea of the thetan, that everybody can achieve OT powers. But Hubbard was left-handed occult. And this is not something I invented, because Blavatsky made a great effort to point out that she was right-handed occult. And anybody who followed anything that was not goodness was left-handed occult. And by the way, I can honestly say that I've read a lot of occult, and I think it's really funny that Hubbard even messed that up. I mean, he went on. He knew very little about it, and he went about it in the wrong way. But he did have this satanic or this evil ability that he was bringing into the religion. And so, to answer your question, Ronnie, what would bring me to want to throw your son over the bridge without any remorse or any conscience is this left-handed occult. Because Hubbard is starting with the idea that you have to have evil to show good. Of course, he goes way off into tangents, but that is the ultimate answer. So to answer the question that Brian Lambert put, there are evil realms in Scientology, and they're coming from Hubbard's view that hey, thanks for putting these up. This is really good. That you had to have the evil. So Hubbard is following Crowley, but I read Crowley in depth. Even Crowley made this huge emphasis on love. You read Crowley and you listen to the accounts of the people that he pulled in. Now, I'm not going to get into the sexual aspects of it, because that's ultimately what happened. It became free love. But Crowley was pulling these people in on the idea of love, and that you had to be open and free and all this. And he also, even though he was murdered in the press and did an awful lot of bad things, he did have the idea that virtue was necessary.
We're talking about Aleister Crowley, the magician, right?
Even you can put Hubbard to the left side of Crowley.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling, but you can. So we get into this thing about the GE, and I wanted to get into this double triangle because this is so vitally important. If you go back into Kabbalah or you go back into Solomon, because I've heard 10 different interpretations of the double triangle. So I'm not going to get into that, anybody who thinks which is right. I'm going to just get into one in particular. And this is the key to why he goes back and audits the GE, which is the complete reversal of all of Scientology and invalidates the entire subject. Okay, in Kabbalah, they have a double triangle. It is, the first one stands for the spirit. The second one stands for matter or GE or body or whatever you want to call it. You must, in ancient Kabbalah, maybe modern ones don't, but in ancient Kabbalah, you must clear both. You must work on the spirit and you must work on your material side at the same time. And the way you move and what the triangles stand for, it's Pythagorean. It's a triangle is three. It's a tripod. You need three. So you start with one element, the second element, and then the third element is sort of your ore that gets you through it. So you need to create this in order to clear yourself. And that's very clear. They even had a thing, they didn't call it a genetic entity, but they called it something else. It's probably some Hebrew word. But Hubbard changes the first triangle to the affinity, reality, communication. He changes the second triangle to knowledge, responsibility, and control. Okay, and then he says, quite honestly or quite blankly, you don't need to audit the GE. You don't need to audit the material side. So he runs the entire thousands of people, collects millions of dollars. He runs them on the Thetan, doesn't run them on the GE. And then in 1980, he makes the blank statement, this boisterous, unbelievably idiotic statement, that I didn't really know that you had to audit the GE. So you're going to have to audit the GE. So here's history of man. Go to it. All right. So now what is he doing at that particular point in time? He's saying all of your past auditing is invalid. The reason that you can't go exterior with full perception is, guess what? You never audited your GE. So you really get into now, how is David Miscavige going to move Scientology forward if he throws out these sacred words of L. Ron Hubbard, which I don't believe him anyway, but to maintain internal consistency within the religion, how are you going to make that happen? You can't. You're dead in the water. There is no movement forward. There is no exterior with full perception. There is not even a possibility of exterior with full perception because your genetic entity is holding you back. And I'll tell you, he says right there in that OT8 material, he says there are planets where magicians are free to paint reality. There are planets where magicians can exteriorize without the implant from OT3 putting them or propelling them back into their bodies. In other words, this implant that was formulated during Xenu's explosion by these beings in outer space that live outside of the Mess universe is what's keeping you from exteriorization with full perception. So now, what do I do on the free winds after I run the Heliotrobus implants? Well, it's a no-brainer. You run that implant. So I ran that implant using all the techniques that were imaginable that he had ever possibly developed. And guess what? I can't go exterior with full perception. So there's something more. Okay. But that is the reason Scientology fails, because it substitutes this cheap idea of knowingness for full exteriorization. And it's not going to work, because the knowingness is simply based on an egocentric idea where you can't uh, do this. And then listen to Hubbard again. The magician is painting reality, all right? And he's exteriorizing with full perception. That is the lost paradise that I refer to in my book, that Hubbard is looking for, and that David Miscavige has fully blocked forever and ever and ever. And until such time, now I don't believe that if you audited the GE, you're eventually going to reach the goal anyway. But anyway, the people who are in there are fully deluded, fully deluded, no doubt.
Well, that
And
is a fact because, as a matter of fact, I was involved in Scientology for 42 years. I never met one person who could go exterior with full perception. And I met a lot of people in 42 years, either as a public Scientologist or on staff, because I was on staff for 26 and a half years.
yes,
So
I can.
all of this is leading us to the one realization that it's a sham,
Yes,
all of it.
all of it.
But anyway, I don't want to end with that because we got to get into some things here where you get onto
All right.
OPA, and because this is, I think, what our audience wants to hear. You follow me, George?
Yes, I do. Just direct me to where you want to go now.
Well, no, here's the thing now. We're a little bit coming up to the witching hour. I don't want you to shortchange it. I'll have you on again if you don't mind, but I want them to get a full picture of this, though.
I
So
don't mind.
I don't
I
know
don't
how
mind.
far you can get in, let's say, the next 5 or 10 minutes, but if you can get to a jumping off point, so from that we can get on to another program and hopefully wrap it up.
Okay.
Not that I'm pressing you for time, because I got plenty of time. This is an interesting subject, and I think people deserve to hear this. Do you follow me, George?
Yes, I do. And there's really only one more really important item in regard to the current church, and that is when they tried to get me back to Scientology, your son, or David, wrote a 30-odd page document, which everybody was required to read. And I was getting letters, and the letters were just, I wish I had saved them. I trashed them because I didn't really want anything to do with them. The letters were nothing but stellar magnificence about the 90% who were on OT8 have been recovered, they've been debriefed, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I was up in New England at the time, so I was not going to go down a flag for any reason. But when we eventually did move to Florida, I went into the Church of Scientology, and I was still in good standing. I hadn't been declared. So they didn't have a problem with me. And I said, I want to read this 30-odd page document that explains why OT8 was trashed. And they went out and checked, and they went through the ethics officers, came back and said, well, you're in good standing, no problem. Here is this document. And by the way, it's in the 30 pages. I don't remember what exactly. But he said, you sit at this desk, read it, and then we'll talk to you. So I sat there and read that thing, and this was designed to debrief me and get me back in. Now, what was in that document? You are not going to believe the nonsense that was in that document. What it said is Mr. David Miscavige had done I don't know, he did the Y-Finder course or data series or whatever, and he found the exact why as to what was wrong. He traced it down, and he said in there, L. Ron Hubbard did very few OT7 and OT6 sessions. And if I remember correctly, it was somewhere between 7 and 17, but there were very few. I don't remember the exact number, but let's just stick with few. And he said that in all the time that L. Ron Hubbard ever ran, which is nothing, by the way. People spend thousands of hours on that. He said he never blew a BT by inspection. Now, for those people who never did OT7 and OT8, when you get on OT6, he gives you 10, 12, 15 different ways of blowing BTs. There isn't just one way. The main one is who are you? Why are you there? Let me find out something about you. Getting communication with the BT. But there are others, which like if they ever come up in aggregates, or if they're ever to the side, or if they're stupid, you have ways of handling them. And he said, and he capitalized the word never and put exclamation points after it. He said L. Ron Hubbard never blew a BT on inspection. And then he said, an analysis of every single line of everybody who has ever processed on OT7 and OT8 has found that people blew on inspection. Oh, yeah, sure they did blow on inspection. It was one of the ones that was in there. Now, he probably never looked at all those other techniques on OT6 because he never did the level. So he's using this unbelievably faulty logic. And this is what he used. And he did that for 30 odd pages, saying the same thing over and over and over. And this is where I said, well, not only do I know that L. Ron Hubbard is an idiot, I said he was followed, and pardon me for saying this, because this is what I thought, he's followed by a moron. This is really ridiculous. Nobody could actually say these things.
Now, before we go past this, just if I can give just a brief description of what you're saying, blowing by inspection.
Right.
Look,
yeah.
Like you come in a room and you see a ghost in a corner and you look at it and it disappears.
Correct.
That would be the shortest way to describe a body thetan blowing or leaving by inspection. Like,
correct.
You do it's gone.
It's gone. Right. You don't have to talk to it. You don't have to ask it a question.
Right.
You don't have to. And, I'll tell you something. The other thing that really got to me is I investigated this in depth, and I went into ancient texts to find out how, because spirits were all over the ancient texts. And I could not find anywhere where anybody really had problems with this. And the way it was done in Hindu, and the way it was done in certain Buddhist quarters, and the way it was done in even what I call the Jain quarters, was spirits were no big deal because they all had perception in common. It doesn't matter what kind of being you are in these ancient texts. You're a spirit, or you're this kind of spirit, a good spirit, a bad spirit, or whatever. The way they got rid of them was they all had the common denominator of perception. So you attacked them there. And now it's L. Ron Hubbard, who was this great thinker and always was looking for the common denominator, never found the common denominator of these beings. And so he comes up with these, he does it the hard way. He comes up with, you've got to talk to every one of them, or it's ridiculous. You don't have to talk to you could blow a whole group. I mean, there were so many different variations in there where they were all thinking the same thought the moment of the explosion. There was an interruption. There were other words spoken. It just goes on and on. When all he had to do was attack these on the level of perception. Now, I'm talking about the spirit world. I don't really go any further on that, but I'm thinking, where was this man coming from? So that was it. And I don't know what more we need to cover that's important, but we can certainly do another one. I think that the Fishman papers should be mentioned. Those were the ones, the Fishman affidavits. Those are the documents where the Church of Scientology threw out the OT8 document.
Right.
And how they are surviving, this is why it's, Lucifer's Bridge, Scientology's lost paradise, because they've lost it forever. And now if they take it back, they have to eat crow. And not only that, I don't think the public would put up for it, because you're basically saying, we're going to bring you in here and we're going to start you off, and you have to audit implants, which there's no proof of the implants to start with. And it's just not going to work.
Okay.
It's a mess.
George, you saying a lost paradise.
Yes.
Was that paradise ever attainable with the technology of Scientology, as you describe a paradise, or most people would?
No.
Was-
No, it was
So-
never attainable. No.
We're literally talking about a fucking dog chasing his tail.
Yes, going around
If
circles.
he catches it, all he has is a tail in his mouth.
Yeah.
But to the dog who's chasing his tail, he thinks, I got to get this. This is important. Okay, look. And how are we doing on time?
We're past the hour.
Okay, anybody have any questions there before we end off?
I don't have any super chats.
Okay, because look, there are some important things, because I really want to get into what you mentioned to me, and we don't have time now. Obviously, we're out of time. A cult within a cult.
Yes.
That I want to have you describe totally, because that would be of high interest to a lot of people, and about superpower and some other things that I want to give you a proper amount of time. Who knows what it's going to take, but I think we should be able to wrap it up in the next episode.
No problem.
Okay, George, I want to thank you for coming on. And just as a end, what do you want to call it? A commercial? I guess it is.
Yeah.
Look, you want to support this program? And remember, I'll read this quote to you again. I love it. As I said, it was on Mike Rinder's blog. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. So keep that in mind. Get somebody else to subscribe to this. Get somebody else to watch these episodes. Become a patron, and help us in this endeavor where we're trying to expose this to enlighten people so that they don't get caught up in it. If we can save people from joining the cult of Scientology, or any cult, I'm going to be happy, because that's my whole purpose of doing this. So anyway, for now, though, I'm Ron Miscavige. This is Life After Scientology. I'll see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.